Hi everyone, it's David from Binq, and today I'm incredibly excited to welcome today's guest, Mr. Joe Navarro. How are you, Joe?
Well, thanks for having me on your program.
Thanks for joining. Joe is a former FBI agent. He is a public speaker. He is an author of, is it 14 books you've written now, Joe?
14? Yep.
Executive coach, you name it. But where I first became aware of Joe's work was around 10 to 15 years ago, I think. I was watching World Series of Poker reruns on ESPN in the US, and they would do these really interesting segments where they would cut away to an expert who would talk about players' body language and some of the information we may be able to glean from things they're doing in certain hands. And the person they used for this was Mr. Joe Navarro. So for me, it was fascinating. And I'm really privileged to be able to speak to you today, Joe. Can you tell us how that World Series work came about?
Strangely, I had just retired from the FBI and I had started writing, something that I didn't expect to do, but uh, and I had done a TV show with Annie Duke about people who had this talent for reading others. And of course, she went at it from the perspective of a poker player, and I went at it as a former FBI agent. And she had found out that I had written a bunch of articles for the FBI Law Enforcement Bulletin, which are still out there. And so we stayed in touch after the filming of the show, and she was interested in using that knowledge to the poker world. Well, somehow the word got around, and so one day I'm home and I get this phone call from somebody I'd never heard of ever, and claimed to be Phil Hellmuth. And he said, "I'm putting on a poker academy. Want you to come and teach." And basically, I said, "Not interested. I don't know who you are, and I don't know if this is real." And I think the next day or a couple of days later, Jeff Goldenberg, somebody he was working with that was putting on the World Series of Poker Academy, which at the time was at Caesar's Palace, said, "No, this is legit." And I said, "Hey, I don't play poker. I don't know how to play poker. I don't know the rules. My father, he wasn't a religious man, but he forbade us to gamble because we were very humble." And the guy said, "It doesn't matter. Just come and teach us what you know about body language and human behavior." And that's really how it got started. And you're saying it's more than a decade ago. I mean, time has really gone by, and that turned. I don't think anybody knew how successful those things would become. They were sold out. Um, Events. I mean, we'd have 200 plus people to be coached there, and we were doing four of them a year, if I
Wow.
remember right, there at Caesars, and that's where I met obviously Phil Hellmuth, and Antonio Sfanderi, TJ Cloutier, Greg Raymer. I mean, endless amount of individuals who were professionals, but they were all interested in the same thing, just gaining a little bit insight that they didn't have.
Yeah, I bet. Absolutely. I was going to say, do you play poker? But it's probably good for the rest of us that you don't, given that you probably be able to know exactly
I
what to say.
I don't. I mean, I tried. I have a friend of mine who would sit down with me and try to go through it, but I'm very restless. And I'm busy working. I'm busy writing. Like I said, I've written 14 books. I'm working on my 15th right now, and I'm actually doing research for my 16th book, which should come out in 2028. But it takes that long to, do the research and write and so forth. So I just didn't have any time. And when I did try to play poker, guys would get so frustrated with me at the table because I'd be sitting there looking at the cards, doing the math, slowing things up, and it was like, finally, come on, Joe, it's a dime to call. It's just 10 cents to call.
Yeah,
You
no,
know, it's like 10% of a quid to to just call. And I said, no, 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 this is important. So finally, no more invites.
yeah,
I got no invites, but I learned a lot. I learned about well, the one thing that I learned was that it really didn't matter what you were playing for, whether you were playing for dimes or dollars or hundreds of thousands of dollars, as some of them do. The only thing that mattered was how much you cared. If you cared about the game, then chances were that what you were reading non-verbally um, had merit,
mm,
because it's that possessiveness, it's that fear of losing the your bankroll. It's fear and apprehension of how far you're extended and so forth. So it didn't, and that surprised me. That really
yeah.
surprised me about the poker. Maybe you found that also.
I think that definitely separates the top players. That they say you should treat every game, whether it's a $50 buy-in or 1,000, exactly the same. You shouldn't be checking your phone every 5 minutes and talking to people, not paying attention. There's always information out there. So I think you make a really good point that if you're really taking it seriously, then it doesn't really matter what stakes you're playing. You're competitive, you want to win, and yeah, that's a really really interesting point. Just to touch on your FBI career, I think I read that you were in the FBI for over 25 years, which is obviously a huge amount of time. What was it in your role that you were doing there that was related to human behavior and body language and stuff like that? What's the background there? If you can share with us.
Yeah, no, sure. Well, one of the things I found out that really, being in the FBI, you're really just a paid observer. Um, and I hate to reduce it like that, and at the same time, I want to elevate it like that. People think it's about, oh, how fast you can run or how well you can shoot, and stop right there. The best agents I ever worked with were really good observers. They
Wow.
were the best observers. They could come into a crime scene, and they could look around and say, okay, this is where the suspect was standing. This is where the victim moved. They just had this ability to observe in so much detail. And certainly in the area that I specialized in, which was counterintelligence. So I was a spy catcher, where you're up against professional spies who are trained to hide what they're doing. And so you're looking for small clues, like how often do they smoke a cigarette when they're operational versus when they're down? Do they walk on the outside of the sidewalk or the inside of the sidewalk? How often do they touch their face? I mean, little things that you look for that says, they're operational right now, or they're just out and about enjoying New York City. And so the behavioral stuff was both being able to observe human behavior, but then to interpret human behavior. I mean, one thing is to say, yeah, he scratched. Yeah, but what does that mean?
Right.
Well, in context, for instance, when somebody goes from, and this applies to poker, when somebody goes from touching their face, which we do all day long, to scratching, that's actually highly significant, because the nerve endings are suddenly being hyperstimulated when we scratch, which means we're under greater stress. So the
Okay.
brain is saying, that soft touch isn't cutting it. You need to elevate it to something really that digs in. And so things like that, being able to interpret the behavior and then what do we do with that? And of course, in a interview setting, um, that's where it had its most profound effects. Is am I seeing psychological comfort or psychological discomfort when we ask questions, and to what questions, and so forth. So it really, and especially the unit that I was in, which was a 6-person unit selected out of 12,500 agents, which was truly elite, um, in that they were all handpicked, and our job was to get into the heads of people to really understand what's motivating them and why are they doing the things they're doing. So yeah, I lucked out. I mean, I really lucked out.
I mean, you were obviously very, 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 very good at it. In poker, we talk about these things, touching the face and stuff, as tells, and some sort of behaviour that gives off can be indicative of something, and we have to, like you say, work out what that something is. But on the flip side of that, we also have something in poker, and I guess in real life as well, called false tells, where people are deliberately doing something. They might touch their nose or mouth or whatever it may
Yeah.
be in order to give you a message which isn't perhaps genuine. Is that something you would see
Yes.
with the interviews, especially against spies who are trained to deal with interview techniques and stuff?
Right. So let's talk about a couple of things, because you asked a very deep, profound question. And we have to be careful. As I often say when I teach science students, not all analogies are analogous.
Right.
So in real life, it's much different than poker, and I'll give you the difference here. In poker, what you're reading, right? Because everybody's hiding what they have. What you're reading are the perceptions that that person has of their own hand vis-a-vis the community cards, vis-a-vis every other player.
Hmm.
So you're not reading reality. You're reading their perceptions of reality. And
Right.
I think I was telling somebody the other day, first time I went to Vegas, and they sent me down at a table, and they're trying to teach me poker, and I look at my cards, and I almost went ecstatic. I had a pair of twos, and I'm thinking I'm going to win this,
Right.
and and I'm all giddy. I've got happy feet, I got a big grin and so forth. And I'm sure that many a poker player has been up against a naive player, and they're reading the right body language,
Right.
but what they're really reading is not reality, but the perception of that person. And if you think you've got the losing hand, and you're slumped, and you're breathing shallow, and it's being reflected in you, you may have the winning hand, because everybody else either folded or for whatever reason, versus reality. In as I pointed out in my book, What Everybody Is Saying, there was an individual on the Parker Indian Reservation who had killed somebody with an ice pick. Now, an ice pick is a very odd weapon to use, and only the culprit knew that they had used it, obviously, and then myself as the investigator. And so when we finally got to interview the person that we were pretty sure had done it anyway, because of what other witnesses had said, when I asked him, I think his name was Ricky Gates, and I said, he kept saying, I didn't do it, I didn't do it. That's fine. I don't care, but I'm going to ask you questions. And my question was, but if you had killed him, would you have used a gun? No. Would you have used a machete? No. Would you have used a knife? No. Would you have used an ice pick? And his chin comes down, his eyelids come down. And, and at that point, I mean, it's an easy read. I said, Ricky, come on. You and I both know. So what we call guilty knowledge, right, only applies because he in fact had guilty knowledge to the exclusion of all other people on that reservation.
Yeah.
That is not poker. The poker is very artificial because there's so many other things that are going on. Mm-hmm. But that doesn't mean you can't accurately read others. You mentioned something earlier. The other thing I found is that a lot of poker players just go there to throw money away. You see them. I mean, I've seen some bizarre things where the guy's on the phone. His girlfriend is nibbling literally on his ear. I'm not making this up. This happened in Atlantic City. The girlfriend is nibbling on his ear. He's on the phone, and he's watching sporting events while playing poker.
Oh, yeah.
And I was there giving a presentation, and somebody said, well, can you read this guy? And I go, no. No, I can't. I have no idea where his focus is, and what does it matter? Everybody at the table is just there to take advantage of him because he's not following the game. And usually the good poker players, the really good ones, as Greg Raymer told me, he says, a good player should be folding about 70% of the time. And I think other players have confirmed that. And this guy was just throwing money away. And so you see everything. But that doesn't mean you can't read the behaviors. The big question is, you're reading the behaviors in relationship to what? Mm-hmm. And so, for instance, when cards are immediately dealt, a lot of players will look at their whole cards, and you may see a very quick visceral reaction, including pupillary dilation, which a lot of people say, oh, that's really difficult to see. Difficult, but not impossible. They may arch their eyebrows without realizing it because they do it all the time. They may even flare their nose because now they're oxygenating because they realize I'm back in the game, or I've got a better hand than I just had. Any number of little, as you say, tells that can leak out that reveal emotions on a visceral level. And by visceral, I'm talking about what Dr. Ambati at Harvard talked about, which are those very authentic behaviors that we reveal very, very quickly, and that can be read equally quickly. So there are some things that you can look for.
Yeah.
But to your question, can you do what we call perception management? I'm going to pretend I'm strong when I'm weak. My argument with that is you would have, it all depends on how good of an actor you are. Mm. How many Marlon Brandos are there? How many Meryl Streeps are out there? I find that most poker players, I'll give you an example. When Mike Carroll's book came out, had 50 tells. That'd been the standard for years. Then Read'em and Reap came out, and there were 164 tells in there. And that changed what people were looking for. All of a sudden, it went from the face to the hands. And a lot of people, when I said that the steeple is the most powerful and authentic sign of confidence that we have, we know it because in 1974, when I was studying blind children, they perform it and they've never seen it. So
Mm.
it's hardwired in our DNA. What I found was people would begin to feign that they were strong by steepling, but they would do it either too slowly or up here, like, "Hi, can everybody see me?" Right? Ta-da,
Yeah.
ta-da.
Too strong.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Did you all get that? Or the other thing I would see is that it was awkward. If you do it naturally, your fingers always come together.
Yeah.
They were kind of very klutzy in the way they were doing it. But I think a lot of people got bamboozled. Um, but then again, they usually only performed one behavior instead of a cluster of behaviors, which
Right.
would have been uh, more effective.
Yeah.
Um,
And more natural, I guess, as well. If someone exhibits a few things at the same time, it tends to be natural rather than you're concentrating on, I must get my steeple correct, you know? So,
Yeah, yeah, and but then again, what good is a steeple if you're texting uh, one half of your friends? These behaviors are lost on you. Yeah.
yeah, I think the key word that you said in there that jumped out to me was authenticity. And there's sometimes you can tell when someone's doing something at the poker table that is, there's something about inside you, you just know it's natural what they've done. And there's other times where you think there's not something quite right about the way they've just moved or the way they've done that. Are they trying to tell me they're weaker than they are or stronger than they are? So some of it seems to come down to just your innate, I don't know, like gut feel, I guess people call it.
Yeah, I mean, all a gut feeling is, especially those of us who've studied the vagal nerve and how it innervates the body. Most people don't realize that gut feeling. You actually have neurons in your stomach,
Mhm.
the same neurons as in your brain. No difference.
Wow.
Um, so through the vagus nerve, there's constant communication, and that gut feeling is actually your subconscious processing information and saying, you know what, that doesn't seem right. Normally we see transitions from, pensive thinking, touching to now scratching to even more scratching or taking deep breaths and looking in a certain direction. And when they vary, your subconscious actually does a lot of most of the processing. So it evaluates, well, what did that look like,
Hmm.
and why isn't that fitting in with the templates?
Yeah.
Right? Everybody has their own template of behaviors, what we call idiosyncratic, which I've always taught, especially in Vegas, where they will there's so many tables. They'll say, okay, the next 8 players line up. Okay, table 58 is now open. Go sit down. When that table opens up, you really get to see a lot of behaviors that we attach to psychological discomfort. You're around people you don't know. They're sitting very close to you, closer than at the dinner table.
Yeah.
And so your body is reacting to all these people and different things. And that is a great opportunity to collect information because you're going to see that later on. We don't have an infinite amount of behaviors that reveal psychological discomfort. Each of us, there are X amounts, and we choose the ones that we tend to favor. So you'll see people for instance, that favor what's called perioral stroking. They'll do that, right? And when there's a lot of stress, they'll do that even more. You'll see some that are, fifth cranial nerve. They love to pinch the very tip of the nose. There's a nerve line that goes right to the tip. So they'll go like this. Like, it has nothing to do with cocaine, by the way. I get that question a lot. It has to do with the fact that you have this very select nerve ending and it's very sensitive. So people touch it. And so you're going to see that as a form of relieving stress over and over and over again, including things like, guys that often ventilate when they get, they go from thinking they have a great hand, and then the last card comes out, and now all of a sudden they're looking at their whole cards, they're looking over at the community cards, and they start to ventilate. You might as well have shouted a marginal.
Yeah.
So look at me. So there's some of that going on. One of the things that I told players, and it may still hold, is that you can be strong and you could be marginally strong, and you're going to see displays of that, but you're not going to be weak and strong. So what that tells us is that 2/3 of the time, if you apply the laws of behavior right, you're going to be right. So you can have somebody that is weak, very weak, or marginally weak, but not weak and strong. So is it possible that, somebody could have a better hand? Yeah, well, what are the statistics, So 2/3 of the time, if you're reading the body language correct, you should be correct. But again, the question is, what perceptions are you reading from the other player? And that's where it really, as they say here, the rubber meets the road. Is what am I? And I've seen Phil Hellmuth just absolutely read somebody right, but they were such a weak player or a novice that they were playing, they just didn't even know what they had.
Right.
And that drives the real pros crazy.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing I just wanted to touch on was the hands, and I've seen some of your work on the thumbs and how important they are to what people are expressing. Can you say a bit about thumbs there?
Yeah. So one of the things that I studied over the years as I was, doing interviews, when you do a lot of interviews, you're talking to people for hours, and I had done about 13,000 interviews in the bureau, and one of the things that I noticed is when people are confident, the space between their fingers relaxes. They can literally grow, sometimes to the point where they put their hands down, spread like a. When they lack confidence, the fingers come together, and when there's total lack of confidence, dogs tuck their ears in, humans tuck their. And I found players who, lacking total confidence in their cards, would put their hands on the cards, but would tuck their thumbs really far in without realizing you're giving away that you feel weak. Now, again, that's perception, but and invariably it was very accurate. The other behavior we found that was extremely accurate was players who looked at their cards and immediately either wrinkled their nose or they pulled their lips to the side. They folded. Um, they were almost guaranteed to fold within one or two hands.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah, I think
and I don't think they ever realized that they were giving that away. And a player asked me, I said, well, what good is that if they're going to fold? And I said, well, you encourage them to stay in.
or if alternative, you're in a hand with them later and you see that behavior, then perhaps it could be a little bit weaker. Because I think I've seen in some of your
Well,
work.
no, they're usually weaker. So, the guys, because a lot of these guys banter, right?
Right.
And they'll say, it's they start moving their cards around like I'm gonna fold. No, no, don't fold. Add to the pot.
Yeah, please stay it.
Please add to the pot.
Yeah. Because
And I know a few players that actually use that and encourage people to stay in. So yeah, there are ways to use, as we say, to use the data.
right, absolutely, yeah. Because you've talked about concealed pacifiers as well. That is there, other ones that we should look out for in our everyday lives that we should be perhaps, you know,
Yeah.
conscious of, or
Well, in poker, you definitely saw concealed pacifiers because I mean, it just would jump at me. Um, People who normally would just scratch their face, right? Um, all of a sudden would be like this, and it would be this really controlled, slow pacifier. And it was like, why are you hiding this? The other way we hide pacifiers is to um, within the mouth, people will stroke their cheek and they'll force the tongue against the cheek, which again serves to pacify, but it's hidden. You see this a lot in court. You see it a lot with people testifying before Congress. They know the cameras are on them, so rather than lick their lips and do a lot of facial touching, you'll see them do a
uh,
lot of this, which really just pops out.
yeah, okay, that's interesting. And then
Yeah. What, by the way, speaking of interesting, one other interesting thing I found, and it's very useful. Um, if you ever want to study somebody's tells, just watch a video of them playing, but speed it up. Now, a lot of researchers do it by slowing it down, and that doesn't work that way.
hmm,
If you speed it up by 2x or 3x, all the idiosyncratic tells that a player has, they jump out like a cartoon article
right,
or a cartoon segment.
hmm,
So if you're looking at any of the poker greats, they all have tells. And I was admonished not to reveal names and tells. So I try not to do it anymore. But I remember early on, there was one poker player in particular from Canada, and when he was strong, his forehead was smooth as a baby. I mean, smooth as a baby.
mhm.
But the minute he was weak, the lines in his forehead would just furrow. And yeah, unfortunately, I revealed that in public because to me it was just so obvious. How could people not see this? And so he asked me not to do it anymore.
And he since had any Botox or
He did. He in fact got some Botox, which if listen, if I was a pro poker player, my whole everything from the chest up would be Botox.
yeah, I think I need
Yeah,
to
my children would not be able to recognize me.
yeah.
It's like, what happened to Daddy? Yeah.
Joe, we're really short on time, so I wanted to finish on a couple of things. One was a question that I always ask everybody that I speak to, which is if you were to play heads-up poker against somebody from any walk of life, who would it be and why?
Um, well, I can answer that really easily. Annie Duke, and not because of her poker playing, because she would clean me out. Because she's one of the smartest people I've ever met. Her interests, I mean, we used to sit and talk for hours, and we could talk particle physics. We could talk about game theory. We could talk about history. We could talk about any number of topics. Carl Sagan, it didn't matter.
Right.
She is just fascinating to talk to. And so for me, if I'm going to talk to someone, I want to be intellectually fed.
Yeah.
And she's really good at that.
Amazing. But thank you so much again for your time, Joe. I know you're a very, very busy man. I'm going to put some links to your work, some of your books and stuff like that, so people can read up themselves because there's so much work you've done, and I've only touched just the tip of it, and it's been amazing to consume. So thanks, Joe. And I'll see you soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye bye.